Inside that house, time did not move forward. It collapsed inward. The Cleveland Kidnappings. Inside the house, there were no calendars, no seasons, no future plans, only rules and the consequences of breaking them. This is not a story about one girl. This is the story of a house that learned how to silence 3 lives. Inside that house, time did not move forward. It folded in on itself. From the outside, it looked like any other home on a quiet Cleveland street, unremarkable enough to disappear into the neighborhood. But once the door closed behind them, the house stopped behaving like a place meant for living. Light was rationed, silence was enforced, and space itself became a tool of control. Rooms were not defined by furniture, but by fear. Where to stand, where not to look, how quietly to breathe. The house was designed to confuse rather than confine. Hallways felt narrower than they were. Doors blended into walls, and familiar points of reference slowly vanished. Without knowing the time of day or the rhythm of life outside, the interior began to feel disconnected from reality. Windows existed, but they did not offer perspective or comfort. They were reminders of a world that no longer felt reachable. Even stillness carried tension, as if the house itself was listening, waiting for a mistake. Over time, the house learned their movements, their habits, their silences. It no longer needed constant reinforcement to assert control. Fear settled into the walls, into the floors beneath their feet, shaping behavior without words. Doors did not need to be locked at all times to keep someone trapped. The house had already done that work. With curtains drawn and sound swallowed by the structure itself, the outside world slowly ceased to exist, replaced by an interior reality where days blurred together and the house became a living presence, watching, waiting, tightening its grip without ever needing to move. There were no chains, but no one was free. Rules inside the house were never written down, yet they governed every moment of daily life. What could be said, when it could be said, and whether it should be said at all, were decisions made carefully, often instinctively. Voices were kept low, movements deliberate, curiosity quietly suppressed. The rules were not fixed, they shifted without warning, turning ordinary actions into potential mistakes. What had been acceptable one day could become dangerous the next, and that unpredictability made the rules far more powerful than any visible restriction. Over time, obedience alone was no longer enough. Safety depended on anticipation, reading subtle changes in tone, sensing tension in the air, adjusting behavior before a boundary was crossed. The girls learned to scan their surroundings constantly, measuring each step and each sound. Even small unconscious habits were corrected, reshaped by the understanding that attention could bring consequences. The rules did not need to be enforced loudly. They were absorbed slowly, settling into the body and guiding behavior automatically. Eventually, the rules stopped feeling external. They no longer came from the house or from spoken instructions, but from within. Every pause, every breath, every moment of stillness was filtered through an internal checklist of what was allowed and what was not. The house did not need to remind them of its authority. The rules had already done their work, transforming fear into routine and control into something that felt unavoidable. Punishment inside the house was rarely immediate or predictable, and that uncertainty made it more effective than force alone. There was no clear line between what was tolerated and what would be punished, which kept everyone in a constant state of alertness. Silence could stretch for hours or days, growing heavier with time, while isolation reinforced the sense of being cut off from any form of reassurance. Often, the absence of explanation was itself the punishment, not knowing what had gone wrong or when the tension might ease. The purpose of punishment was not correction, but control. It trained behavior through fear of repetition rather than fear of pain, encouraging constant self-monitoring. Each consequence lingered long after it ended, shaping future choices and narrowing the range of what felt safe. Over time, punishment no longer required action. The memory of it was enough. Fear settled quietly into routine, ensuring compliance without the need for constant reinforcement. Control inside the house did not always rely on locks or restraints. There were moments when doors remained open and movement was technically possible, yet escape felt distant and unreal. Years of conditioning had taught them to measure every action against its potential consequences. The fear of what might happen after an attempt to resist was often stronger than the idea of freedom itself. In that environment, control was sustained not through constant force, but through expectation. Over time, captivity became familiar, even predictable, while freedom turned abstract and uncertain. The house had reshaped their sense of risk, teaching them that survival depended on caution rather than courage. Every choice was weighed carefully, not against possibility, but against punishment. The most effective restraint was no longer physical. It was the belief that any step beyond the known boundaries would only lead to something worse. When they were together, connection existed in careful fragments rather than open gestures. A glance held a second too long, a whispered word exchanged only when the house felt quiet enough, a shared understanding that did not require explanation. They learned how to communicate without drawing attention, how to offer comfort without inviting consequence. Even closeness had to be measured, shaped by the constant awareness that being seen or heard could change everything. Their bond was built slowly, under pressure, and without the language of hope. There were no promises spoken aloud, no discussions of rescue or reunion. Instead, there was a quiet agreement to endure, to watch out for one another in small, practical ways. A warning look, a subtle shift in posture, a moment of stillness meant to signal danger. These gestures carried more meaning than words ever could. At times, being together was its own form of risk. Separation was used to reinforce fear, to remind each of them how easily connection could be taken away. Yet, even in those moments, the knowledge that the others existed somewhere within the same walls offered a fragile sense of grounding. They were not sharing the same experience in the same way, but they were sharing the same confinement, the same silence, the same unspoken understanding of what survival required. In a place designed to erase individuality, their presence reminded each other of something human. Not freedom, not escape, but recognition. A confirmation that they were still seen by someone, still known, still real. Those brief, guarded moments of connection did not change their circumstances, but they altered how they endured them. Together, quietly and cautiously, they found ways to survive a reality that was meant to be faced alone. As time passed, it stopped behaving the way it once had. Days were no longer measured by dates, weekends, or seasons, but by repetition and absence. Without calendars or clocks, the markers that normally give life a sense of movement quietly disappeared. Birthdays passed unnoticed, holidays arrived and left without meaning, and the idea of a future became increasingly difficult to imagine. Inside the house, time no longer moved forward. It flattened, stretching endlessly without distinction. The outside world slowly transformed into something distant and abstract. News, routines, and ordinary life continued somewhere beyond the walls, but it no longer felt connected to them. Memories of school, family, and everyday moments began to blur, not because they were forgotten, but because there was nothing new to anchor them against. When every day followed the same pattern, memory lost its edges, and time collapsed into a single continuous present. This distortion became its own form of confinement. Without a sense of progression, there was nothing to count down toward, nothing to anticipate. Survival replaced duration as the only meaningful measure, not how long they had been there, but whether they would make it through another day unchanged. Time was no longer something that passed. It was something that pressed in from all sides, heavy and unmoving, reinforcing the feeling that this reality might never end. Hope was something they learned to keep at a careful distance. It was not rejected entirely, but handled cautiously, as if holding it too tightly could cause more harm than comfort. Hope invited imagination, and imagination led to expectations, expectations that could be shattered without warning. In that environment, disappointment was dangerous. It weakened focus, disrupted control, and made endurance harder. So instead of hoping, they adapted. Survival became the quieter, more reliable goal. It meant staying alert, conserving energy, and learning when to remain invisible. Each day was reduced to manageable pieces. The next hour, the next moment of silence, the next opportunity to avoid attention. By narrowing their focus, they protected themselves from the weight of time and the uncertainty of what might come next. Survival did not require belief in a future. It only required presence in the moment. This way of living reshaped how they understood strength. Endurance was not dramatic or inspiring. It was restrained, repetitive, and deeply internal. There were no victories to celebrate, only days endured without loss. By choosing survival over hope, they preserved what little control they had left. It was not surrender, it was strategy, a way to remain intact in a place designed to break them. Silence inside the house was never empty. It carried weight, intention, and consequence. It dictated when it was safe to move, when it was safer to remain still, and when even breathing felt too loud. Sound was not simply discouraged, it was managed, rationed, and feared. Over time, silence became a shared understanding, a condition everyone learned to read and respect without explanation. Words were withheld not out of choice, but out of instinct. Speaking risked attention, and attention could shift everything. Conversations were reduced to fragments, then to glances, and eventually to nothing at all. The absence of sound did not bring peace, it brought vigilance. Each quiet moment required awareness. Each still moment demanded restraint. Silence was how danger was avoided, how mistakes were prevented, how survival was maintained. As the years passed, silence stopped feeling imposed and began to feel internal. It settled into habits and thoughts, shaping how they reacted even when no one was watching. The house no longer needed to enforce quiet. It had already taught it. In that space, silence became more than the absence of noise. It became the environment itself, a presence that filled every room, held every breath, and reminded them that endurance often depended not on what was said, but on what was never allowed to be spoken. Inside that house, survival was never about escape. It was about endurance, about learning when to stay quiet, when to disappear, and how to live inside fear without letting it erase you. The walls did not move, the doors did not change, but something else slowly did. Not outside the house, inside them. Because even in silence, even under control, something was waiting. Next on True Echoes. For years, the house held them. Silence kept them alive. Then one day, silence was no longer an option. One moment changed everything. The Escape, 2013. Coming soon on True Echoes. And when silence finally broke, everything changed. What part of this silence stayed with you the most? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'm listening. And step into the echoes of truth. To be continued.